So I shall introduce our very first speaker today, Dr. Anthony Medrano. Dr. Medrano teaches at Yale and US. I first got to know Dr. Anthony Medrano through his work with his students for this module called Edible Ocean. Dr. Medrano just published a book together with his students called La La Land, Singapore's Seafood Heritage. I've worked with him a couple of times, taking students out to Kampong Glam to look at the history, its history and sort of food elements of the historic district. But Dr. Medrano also once shared with us stories of Singapore botanies. We are familiar with names like Ridley, Burkill, Holton, but what about the people behind them, behind the directors of the Singapore Botanic Gardens, the collectors, the people who come up with the illustrations that provided a shed light about our botany as food and also as medicine. So please put our hands together as I introduce. Let's get Dr. Medrano upstage, please.
Let's begin. All right, thank you so much for that introduction, Keir. I owe so much to Keir. He's just created so many opportunities. He's been so supportive, both for myself, but my students most importantly. And he's just, as we all know, he's just a super special person. So thank you so much. And I'm going to dive right in because I've only got 15 minutes. So the talk today, is called A Botany of Singapore's Food and Medicine. And it's really stories from the garden. Let's see if I can. There we are. Okay. Stories from the garden. So we're going to hear a lot today, I think, hopefully about cooking and about eating and about foraging and about harvesting, making, celebrating, catching, fishing, curing. But I want to share a different kind of story, about food and medicine that really speaks to a different kind of edible history. It's one that recovers and remembers and recenters, I think, a forgotten heritage in the garden. So my talk is really it's grounded in the Singapore Botanic Gardens. And this is a picture of the Singapore Botanic Gardens there. So make a trip to the Singapore Botanic Gardens, and these names will be alive and in bloom. Ridley, Burkill, and Holton, just as Keir mentioned. Collectively, they constitute a very familiar garden story. These names, again, they mark the garden's built environment too, from lanes and courtyards to benches and buildings. And here we've got Holton Hall, which is still standing, and that's where the SBG Heritage Museum is. So over the next 13 minutes, I'm going to take us on a plant-based journey through stories of science, art, and kin. And these stories are going to be rooted in the lives and contributions of Muhammad Hanif on the left here, you see his name, Drami bin Samsuri on the bottom, and then community at the end. And this is another picture of the garden. And it's the community that I'm actually going to be really speaking to, which is the kampung's community. The garden had a kampung. This plant-based journey speaks to and recalls a less familiar garden story for some, which is one of knowing Singapore's food and medicine through a history of herbarium sheets and botanical illustrations. First, and so these are their obituaries, Jarami's obituary and Muhammad Hanif's obituary on the left. There we go. But first and foremost, the garden was a home to a kampung. We might even say a Nusantara kampung. For nearly a century, from the late 19th century to 1979. To live in the kampung, you had to work at the garden, and it was that simple. So what we end up finding over a century is really a kind of rich family history of fathers and mothers working, daughters and sons working, and filling in positions. The herbarium was a very important place for this history. So the first person I want to talk about is this gentleman here, Muhammad Hanif. In the mid-1920s, Muhammad Hanif lived in the garden. He co-authored this really wonderful, rich book, which I'll encourage you I encourage you all to download. It's called Malay Village Medicine, published in 1930. In that book, Hanif collected 1,675 plant entries. These were medicinal plant entries. And he collected names and localities, uses, and specimens, herbarium sheets. And this is a picture of Muhammad Hanif here. Here are just two specimens from that book. On the left, we've got Ubi Arak, number 1515, and on the right, we've got number 458, the Daub. So let's just talk a little bit briefly about Ubi Arak, the one on the left. This was collected by Muhammad Hanif in 1924. This is the actual specimen. He collected plants, these specimens from Teluk Ansin, Tapa, Tanjung Malim, as well as Kuala Lipis. So this plant was used for, as he reports, for blistering feet. You would boil the leaves of this plant and you would apply it as a lotion on your feet. There's 1,600 and some odd number of entries like this of medicinal uses documenting this botany of Singapore's food and medicine. Number 458 on the right, I'll say just briefly, was collected again by Hanif. And this plant was used often by women for a variety of elements, including nervousness and anxiety, according to Hanif. So those two plants were collected by Hanif. Number 575, this plant on the left, this is Chong Kradak, which is a Sakai name. Sakai is a community in Malaysia. What's interesting about this plant is the plant on the left is the antidote to the plant on the right. The plant on the left is the antidote to the plant on the right. The leaves of this plant on the left were used as an antidote to Antares poison. So something I want to stay with here, I want to dwell in the name of Antares, the Antares plant on the right. The poison tree's scientific name is the Javanese name for this plant. Antares comes from Anchar, which is the Javanese name for this plant. And the English common name is Upas tree, and Upas is Javanese for poison. So knowledge and practice are embedded not just in the plants and in the uses, but also in the names that carry on. Speaking of names, these are plants that are named after Hanif in recognition of his contributions to Malay botany. We've got an orchid on the left, a fern in the middle, and a myrtle on the right. Names are important. Names carry history and they embody heritage. Gingers are central to Singapore's food and medicine, and the food and medicine of the larger story of Nusantara's plants. This ginger on the right is a specimen that was named after Hanif, but not the species, but the genus. So a scientific name has two parts. It's binomial. It's got a genus and a species. This plant is named after, this genus rather, is named after Hanif. It's Hanifia. And this is the type specimen on the right. So Hanif has a genus of gingers named after him. Number 1529 from Hanif's book. This is Pokok Tembaga Swasa. Its use, seen on the right, its use to treat swelling. You would smear the leaves with coconut oil, heat them together, and then apply on the swelling. We get this from Hanif. This plant, though, also speaks to community. This plant was collected by Haji Muhammad Noor, seen here on the left, and where it was collected from was Lawn Inn, which is located within the Singapore Botanic Gardens. Lawn Inn was near where this kampung was. So we've got Hanif, and now we've got Muhammad Noor. I'm going to go to my next, the next story, which is about botanical illustration. So if those were about specimens and herbarium sheets, the next is about illustrations. This is Tanglim Besar on the top and on the bottom, and that's a school book on the right. The Gardens Kampung's community sent most of their children to Tanglim Besar Malay School, seen here. One of those students was Drami bin Samsuri. So if Hani's story was grounded in herbarium sheets, then Jerami's story is rooted in botanical illustrations. So Jerami studied at Tanglim Basar as well as Victoria School. While at Victoria School, he was a champion swimmer, a champion diver, and a lifeguard, and a really, really great artist. We've got one of his earliest illustrations here on the right. This was during the Japanese occupation. It was painted in 1942. The Japanese had turned the Singapore Botanic Gardens into a vegetable garden, a section, and they asked Jerami to document the vegetables being grown in the garden. So he did the brinjal, the talong, or turong if you're in the Philippines. This is Jerami in 1948, and I want to start here just quickly before I get into his other work, because Jerami, as much as he was important to the story of food and medicine and botany in Singapore, he's also very important to the movement of Malay arts more broadly. So this is Jerami at an art expo in 1948. The year after, the Malay Art Society was founded in 1949. Jerami was one of the founding members. And actually, in 1948, if you wanted to inquire about membership, you had to send your application to Jerami, courtesy of the Singapore Botanic Gardens. So this is young Jerami here. But let's get to some of his illustrations. So Jerami was the first local resident artist at the Singapore Botanic Gardens. There had been earlier artists, but they were from Sri Lanka. So born in Sri Lanka, went back to Sri Lanka. Jerami is the first locally born. And not only locally born, he's like literally born in the garden because that's where he grew up, in the kampung. So he was responsible for hundreds, if not thousands, of botanical illustrations, sometimes acknowledged, but many times not. So these are some books in which his work appears. And I'll go through them somewhat quickly. Here, Plant Life in Malaya. The entry that I wanted to highlight here is this one, of galangal on the right. Jerami did the drawing of galangal on the right, but what we get also from the text is the name Languas galangal. Languas being the Malay name for galangal. I'm going to have to really pick up the pace here. So we've got galangal from Jerami. And while Jerami worked at the garden during the Japanese occupation, the Shononto government published these two books. Excuse me, that's not the one. These two books on the bottom. These were medicinal plants and edible plants published by the Japanese in 44 and 45. When it was republished in English, or a version of it, it was known as Common Malayan Plants. Jerami provided 200-line illustrations, including these two that I'm showing here. This is another book about wildflowers. He provided the illustrations here, this time in color. And this plant we got tapacuda. It's used to treat fish stings. It's the purple flower on the bottom left. This was something else that he did. These are unpublished drawings of Jerami during the 1950s and 60s. Some of these trees were used in medicinal ways, but mostly these were trees used to kind of promote tree planting in Singapore. And the beautification of kampungs, not kampungs, but eventually kampungs, or formerly kampungs, but eventually HDB flat areas and estates and roadsides. But notice in here just his botanical knowledge. He's depicting not just the different trees, but their heights, their shapes, their sizes, and their leaves and roots and trunks. This is Ardisia nuri. So it's collected by Muhammad Noor. Muhammad Noor being, again, from the kampung in the garden. So it's collected by Muhammad Noor on the very top. In the middle, it's taxonomized. That is the scientist who gives it its name. Ardisia nuri, named after Muhammad Noor, N-U-R-I-I. So taxonomized by Caetano Furtado, who was a botanist at the garden. And then we've got the drawing on the left by Jerami. So we've got the type specimen on the right and the drawing on the left. And this is an edible plant, a medicinal plant used to treat fevers. So I want to end here with probably only 30 seconds left, and to just kind of bring home what I was sharing today, I think, which is Serumpun stories. Stories of remembering, stories of recalling, and really trying to expand how we think about food and medicine in Singapore and Nusantara. It's not just about eating. It's not just about, I think, sharing recipes, though that is hugely important to the heritage. But also part of that heritage is the artistic and the scientific contributions that local Malays and others were making as well. I think this is a history that's often overlooked or forgotten, and it's very important for us to bring that back. And I think food is an excellent way to do that. I just will say that this is today's kampung. It's today's evolution garden. There's no marker whatsoever that says that this was the kampung where people lived for nearly 100 years. And I will close with remembering just a handful of the community members who were botanists who contributed to a botany of Singapore's food and medicine. They're here, and there's many, many more. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Medrano. That's quite poignant, really, looking at the people who contributed so much to our botany. And I understand that some of these illustrations and the naming made its way to Kew Gardens. Looking at Tanglin Besar school, that's where Tanglin Mall is today. So that's the location of Tanglin Besar. My dad went to Tanglin Besar, and my dad used to tell me there's a kampung within the Singapore Botanic Gardens, and they're almost all they were Javanese. Yeah.